Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Navina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Ryan Worsley, and if you're not familiar with Ryan, Ryan is a Canadian engineer, producer, mixer, and in his time, he's worked with some awesome bands. Dear Rouge is one band that really helped kick off his career. He's also worked with Courage My Love, Featurette, and Sean Frank as well. And if you listen to his tracks, he does an amazing job of getting really balanced pop rock songs. His tracks not only sound balanced, but they're very exciting. Like, they grow throughout a track, and there's a lot of movement, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. And his vocals sound friggin' awesome. They're just so polished and controlled. And so in this interview, we definitely dig deep into his process for that. And he gives some very thorough, detailed answers. And he has some really cool tricks up his sleeves as far as how he goes about creating extra excitement and all that polish that he gets on his vocals. And like I said, he gives some very thorough details here, which I think will help you easily implement this stuff into your own productions. So if you're someone who has struggled to get your vocals to have that polish and to have that control and ultimately just sound clean and distraction free and just, ultimately have that clarity that everyone really wants with their vocals, this episode is going to help you out immensely. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Ryan Worsley, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. What's going on, man?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with you and your background, who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into all this cool stuff you're working on these days, can you give us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my music career, I guess you could call it a career, when I was 11 years old. I started by playing bass in a Christian heavy metal band in my church, and that was a lot of fun. Very weird to play Christian heavy metal.
Wait a minute, did you play Christian heavy metal in a church, or you guys met at
we
church?
did. We definitely did. It was, we actually had two people leave the church during one of our performances, like for good. They actually left the church because our song was too, I guess it was too metal. It wasn't godly enough.
Love that.
But yeah. That was how I got started. And I started just playing guitar. I was also self-taught. I kind of just picked up the bass and plugged it into my parents' stereo and started playing along to songs, and I just really, really connected with it. I played in indie rock and rock bands kind of in high school and throughout college, which was really fun. I had a lot of fun kind of touring, and I got touring out of my system when I was younger, which was really nice. And then I decided I wanted to study classical guitar in university. So I went to do that, and that was a whole new, incredible experience. I learned so much because I knew nothing about music theory before I went to school. I didn't even know what a scale was, really. That was really great. But the thing I noticed with studying classical music, for me anyways, is that my creativity just completely dropped off. I stopped writing music for about 3 years because I was analyzing everything. I was trying to figure out what key I was in. I was figuring out modulations, and my brain was focused on music history and a technique as opposed to creativity. So I decided that I was going to try my best to forget everything I learned, or just kind of put it in the back of my head. And I managed to get back into the creative side of things. I taught guitar lessons out of university for a while, just privately. I was still playing in bands. Then I got married very young, so I decided I didn't want to tour anymore. So I just started producing my bands, the band that I was in. I was doing it in my apartment. I think I had like a cheap interface and a computer, and that was all I had. But there was something about it that I couldn't stop myself from doing it. There was no way I wouldn't do it. And looking back on it, it was mildly foolish because I wasn't thinking about supporting a family or making this a career. I just knew that I had to do this. That was a lot of fun. And then in about, I think it was around 2012 or so, I worked with a band called Dear Rouge, and there was just Drew and Danielle who were in the band, and they asked me if I wanted to start working and writing on some music with them, and we did that, and that eventually led to them having, I think their first single went to number 2 in Canada, and they were completely independent at the time, and from there they got signed to Universal. The record was called Black To Gold, the one that I did, and yeah, that was kind of what what started my career in music, I would say. From there, I was able to work on the projects that I loved, work on music that inspired me. And it was a really nice change because I remember kind of working on a lot of projects where I was just like, I was just doing it as a job. I wasn't feeling inspired. A lot of tone deaf singers, people that couldn't play. you know how it goes.
It's all part of the grind when you're getting started with it, right?
It is, yeah. Yeah, and I really appreciate all of those projects that I worked on because I feel like the harder a project is to get to the finish line, the more you learn. And I learned so much in regards to, comping drums, editing vocals, finding ways to make less than great singers sound really good, finding ways to make bad drummers sound good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's like if you're serious about getting good sounds, you have to just figure out how to do it. And if you're working with crappy musicians, like you have no choice but to do it, right? Like what are you going to do? Put out let someone put out something that sounds like shit and then your name's associated with it. And, so you have to figure out the ways to like whatever it takes. If it's adding samples or editing, like you just got to get creative with it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really good point because I remember thinking to myself, like I would rather spend an extra chunk of time without getting paid to make this project sound good than just put it out and move on to the next one because my name is associated with that. And that was just something that I adopted very early on. And, I'm really glad that I did. It was a habit that I formed. Yeah.
Of course. Well, there was one thing you said earlier, which I wanted to go back to, which was that you talked about how when you started studying like classical guitar and getting into theory, it was kind of like messing with your writing process and making things almost too analytical or technical. And that's something that I've heard a couple people mention before, this idea that like sometimes when you know the theory, it can box you in a little bit. So what are some ways that you found yourself like trying to get out of that or like, how did you ultimately kind of not fixate on that kind of stuff so much?
That's a really good question. And I hope I have an answer for it. I think once I finished my studies, finished the program, I started playing weddings. And I was still very much in the mindset of like, I didn't know if I was going to become a classical guitarist as a job, as a career, a full, long-term career. And I remember practicing, probably 3 hours a day, just sitting there playing through Bach and Tarraga and all those things. And I think I just started to find it not as fulfilling as I had thought that it was going to be. So if I remember correctly, I think I remember trying to just stop thinking about what I'm doing and just do it. And I think it came down to just feeling the music more than playing the music, if that makes sense. I think a part of that was that when I got into production, I knew absolutely nothing about it. So I had no choice but to just go by the feel of, just of what I thought was working. But it was definitely a process, and I'm happy that I got there because I was kind of scared when it first happened that I was like, what's happened to me? Like I can't even write a song, whereas I was writing lots and lots of music and songs and collaborating on projects when I was, in my teens.
Yeah. Do you feel like part of the reason why you thought it was killing your creativity was because you were able to maybe see patterns in popular music and maybe you thought like, well, that just seems boring now, like at least that's kind of how I've heard it described to me from like a couple other people that like once they kind of figure out a formula, it's like you kind of don't want to be formulaic to some degree. So you try to stretch yourself or I don't know, maybe that was your experience or not. I'm not sure.
Well, I do remember thinking that like when I was studying, I remember thinking that like the faster you can play, the better you are, or the harder things you can play, the better you are. But then I came back to my senses and realized that that's not true at all. Because when you're making music for the listener, it doesn't matter. They don't care how hard it is to play because they have no idea. They just like how it makes them feel. And music is all about feeling. And I'm sure there is a lot of feeling that goes into performing classical and music and really any genre. But I'm kind of talking about the the listener's enjoyment and the senses and the feelings that they get from it. So I really was trying to dig into that. Like it's the goosebumps mentality. Like a song's not finished until it gives me goosebumps. It's not about if the kick drum is, exactly the right frequency or, if everything's technically right. It has to have the feel. So I got back to that point.
For sure. I also imagine too that like it's very different when you're the one writing songs versus, having a band come to you with some songs already pre-written. You're obviously not going to like start getting into too much theory with them. You're just going to work with the songs that they've got. And maybe that helps you also just understand the magic of feel, and like how things come together, what feels good to you and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true as well.
Yeah. Well, as far as the production side of things goes, like you wear a lot of different hats in your productions. You often co-write, you engineer, you mix, and I'm curious to dig into that a little bit too. And I know that one project in particular that you worked on was Noella Charles's Melt, and that was nominated for Album of the Year. But you were a co-writer, producer, mixed it, and I'm curious to know like how do you, when you're wearing that many hats on a project, how do you keep objective? Especially when you are so invested in every stage of the process. Like sometimes people have a hard time when they've just even mixed a song and heard it 1,000 times. But when you're invested in the writing of it and all that kind of stuff too, like how do you keep focused on the objectivity of a song?
I like to get there by trying to keep things fresh all the time. And by that, I mean, I love references. I love listening to references. And whether it's a song that is in a completely different genre. I love just having Spotify playing in the background to like switch between, what I'm working on in Spotify. And that always gives me a fresh perspective because sometimes, you get tunnel vision and you're stuck, especially when you write a song, you produce it, and you mix it, you can kind of get stuck in the things that you think aren't quite right about the track. But then you listen to these other songs and it's like, that vocal's out of tune. And when you really sit down and listen to the particular parts in reference songs, you realize that it doesn't, those little things don't really matter. Another thing that a tool I find myself using that's really helpful is just a little bit of space and time between the track. And sometimes that's not possible, but I like to spend, I don't like to track a song in 2 days and then mix it the day after and then send it off. I definitely like to have the time to sit with the track, play it in my car, listen on headphones, listen on my phone, even just roughs of it, and then listen to references and kind of see where the song's sitting. So those are, I think, the two things that I focus on the most when I'm, tackling all three sides of the track.
Yeah. As far as like going through that entire process of, writing, recording, editing, mixing, and all that kind of stuff, how long do you find it usually takes you like to work on a song?
Well, it can be, I typically say 2 days of tracking, 1 day of mixing. That's what I like to have. Ideally, sometimes it takes a lot longer. There's a particular project I'm working on right now. I think I'm probably making $5 an hour on that project because it's taking forever. But I love the project and I want to see it, I want to get it to the place where it's as great as it can be. Typically, that's my ballpark. It's not usually less than that, but it's quite often a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I like how you broke that down, because that's something that I get a lot of people asking me about, like how long should it take to work on a song? And, it's going to vary depending on the song and people's experience and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But I do think that it's a pretty good thing to sometimes have kind of a timeline or add, restrictions on yourself or something like that so that you can work within those constraints. And I know that like you operate a commercial studio as well. So that has to be a factor when you're booking clients in the door, right?
It does. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It does the artist and the track a disservice if you don't have some sort of time frame to do it in, because the way that we make music now, there's too many options. There's too many choices. Like you don't have to commit to anything. You have unlimited tracks. You don't have to commit to processing. You can record everything dry. I like to make those decisions as soon as possible and I feel confident in them. And that really does help a lot.
If you've been mixing your own music but still feel like your songs don't quite feel finished, what you're likely missing out on is pro mastering. Recently, I've put together a brand new free resource for you. It is called the Home Studio Guide to Radio Ready Masters. And this guide is specifically built for home studio musicians who want to learn how to master their own music to get it sounding loud, polished, and release ready. Inside, I'm going to walk you through some of the most common questions I get about mastering, like what it is, how it's different from mixing, what tools you need to know, and how to avoid common mistakes that I see that hold people back. And if you find this guide helpful, you're going to absolutely love what I've got coming up for you soon. So make sure to grab your copy and keep an eye out. Just head over to masteringguide.com and get your free copy of the Home Studio Guide to Radio Ready Masters. Well, speaking of like the production side of things, one thing I've noticed about your productions that I just think you do an amazing job with is making songs grow throughout a track. And I feel like as I listen to your songs, like I could feel like choruses get louder or wider or more exciting. New elements come into play throughout the song. And I think that's a really cool way of helping songs feel exciting and not get sterile. And so I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to that kind of side of things, like, do you have any tips there as far as things that you generally like to do when it comes to helping songs grow and have that movement throughout a track?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think when I was younger in my career, I used to try and use dynamics. And don't get me wrong, dynamics are so important and I love them. But some of the really early stuff that I did, I was using the dynamics and not like compression dynamics, just like the loudness and quietness of parts and sections of a song, where the chorus would hit really hard. And then when I'd listen to it on the radio, it would just like kind of crush down and it would get really small. I, started to look to other ways of finding that excitement and the growth and the way that a track can evolve over time. And I realized that there's not a whole lot of dynamic movement that you really want in a pop or rock in that particular genre. And obviously that's a blanket statement, but I'm just talking about in general for it to translate well to, to Spotify, to radio, to satellite radio, because satellite radio, it's so different. It's like the opposite of radio. Like satellite radio expands things so that the drums and the low end are expanded, whereas radio, it just crushes things. So it's, there's no dynamics. But a few things that I like to do and sometimes like you record something, you produce something, and it's like the chorus just naturally feels great, or the bigger section, the drop, whatever, it naturally just it just does it for you, and that always feels so good. Where it's like I don't know what I'm doing, but the chorus sounds bigger, and that's such a relief for me. But sometimes, just for whatever reason, with the frequencies that are going on, the chorus actually feels a little bit smaller and feels congested. I mean, obviously creating space in a track is really, really important. Creating that space so that the chorus feels louder, it feels bigger, but it's not actually like getting louder. And that's something that has taken a very, very long time to sort of learn. It's almost like the impression of being bigger, being louder without getting too cluttered. And for me, it has so much to do with the low end and the mid range, like the middle range, like 500 in that sort of general area. But the low end, I think, is the biggest thing. And that's everyone says, and it's so true. It's the hardest thing to get right. And mostly because a lot of people don't have rooms where you can actually hear the low end correctly. I mean, you need such a big room and so much treatment to actually be able to hear the low end and hear what it's doing. And I really like my mix room, the one that I've been in for a while. It's like Studio A of Echoplant. It's the best mix room I've been in, but I still like to listen to how things translate in the real world, in my car, earbuds, phones, that sort of thing. So that's the first way. Another, few little tricks. I always have the some sort of widener on my master bus, and I'll automate that. Open it from. I use the SPL Vitalizer, I think, usually, and there's a widener on that. So I'll just automate that, and I'll go from if the verses are 9 on the knob, I'll go up to like 11 or sometimes 12. And that helps create that illusion of bigness and wideness, especially in stereo. But then you have to be careful that on a phone, it doesn't collapse and sound smaller. So it's always a balance there. Another thing I like to do is high and low pass, just slightly. Sections, the sections before the louder parts of the song, usually the chorus, I'll cut, maybe 40 or sometimes 50, up to 50 hertz in the low end, so that when the chorus hits, it feels bigger without getting too much louder. And then same with the top end sometimes, and not like in an EDM like dance way, but just like in a subtle way where the listener doesn't notice it, but it just opens up. And on the top end, sometimes I'm going down to like, 13K or 15K, really, really gently, and then opening it up again. And then the last thing I'd say, just automation on the master bus. And after all of my processing, because I do process my mix bus pretty very heavily, and I mix into it. After all that has happened, all that damage is done, I like to automate the master bus a little bit, like even just 0.5 dB. Sometimes I'll go verse 2. Sometimes, I'll automate it gradually down from 0 down to like 0.8, negative 0.8 dB. And then when the chorus hits, it feels big again, but you're only gaining, like not even a dB. So it translates really well.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I really like that answer. I think that it sounds like it's a lot of combinations of little things that are helping to enhance that feel. And yeah, even those subtle automations I think are really important. I also think it's really cool that you mentioned it's not just about volume, because that seems like the most obvious way, right? You want a chorus to sound bigger, you just push it louder. And it sounds like you are still doing that to some degree on your master bus, but knowing that radio's still going to compress things, and it's more than just volume that matters. It's cool to hear how you're implementing all these other little moves in there to get that space. You talked about low end and mid range being the thing that really helps a chorus pop. Aside from just rolling off a little bit of low end or top end, do you find yourself wanting to add extra instrumentation into choruses and that kind of stuff to help enhance more of that low end or mid range?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm definitely adding something into those bigger sections. If we're talking about kind of more rock music, obviously it's going to be guitars, but they got to be guitars that just don't eat up space, and they don't move. Like you can record distorted guitars where it's there's so many upper mid-range frequencies in the way that they feel like static and they're not actually moving. So getting guitar tones that feel that they're moving with however the player's strumming, without they're still super compressed, they look like a block, but you're hearing almost the transients come through, and you're getting rid of all that stuff that's just static and not moving.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you don't want it jumping out in front of the vocals or anything like that. Once it comes in, it's got to just add weight. Yeah. At what point in the production process are you thinking about these sorts of moves? Are you right from the beginning kind of mapping out what that mix is going to look like, or do you just tend to focus on it once you have all the elements ready to go?
I mean, I'm being conscious of how each section is feeling from the beginning, and that's how I make my production choices. Because you can start putting synth layers or guitars down in a chorus to make it sound bigger, and then you've got them in the track, and it's really not adding. So I'm constantly doing a checking in my head, how are the dynamics of this song feeling? Is it lifting where it needs to lift? Is it because there's not enough information in there, or is there too much information? Because either one of those things is bad. So yeah, I think I start from very early on in the process. I mean, not with I don't do automation or anything. It's more frequency, choosing what's taking up each frequency region, and making sure that things are dynamic enough, but still, compressed so they fit within the context of the song.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, another thing that I've noticed in some of your mixes too, that I think also maybe adds to this contrast of the verses and choruses, is that you'll sometimes blend like electronic elements with like traditional rock elements, guitar, bass, drums, whatever. And maybe you'll have like programmed drums in a verse or real drums in a chorus or something like that. And it just kind of creates a shift in energy to begin with. And I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to like the songwriting side of things with that, how many of those ideas start as programmed elements, like programmed drums, and then you record real drums after the fact, or the opposite of that? How many times are you switching real drums and turning those into programmed drums?
I'm not gonna lie. I use a lot of samples in my recordings, and it's not to make them sound electronic. It's to make them sound the way that I want them to sound. And it's so common. It's not nothing that I need to hide from, and I'm actually kind of proud of it, because it's sort of how I like to craft my recordings. It is an organic approach to recording, but there are elements of it that, like, I want my productions to jump out of the speakers, to sound larger than life, and in a lot of contexts. I don't care if it's a drum loop. I don't care if it samples. If it's giving me the feeling that I want, then I'm happy with it. To answer your question, I find myself recording live drums probably less than I used to. I still love recording live drums, and there's really, you can't get everything from Addictive Drummer or something like that. It's the feel. It's like the fills. And the fills, I think, are the biggest thing for me. Like, sometimes it'll be a lot, a sequenced drums throughout the song, but it's just the fills are live. And I love that, because that's the human element. Because everything else, a backbeat of like a basic kind of rock beat, that's pretty basic, right? And so many songs have them, and they need them. But it's the fills, it's the builds, it's the little extra cymbal bits, or the feel in the hi-hat. Sometimes I'll just record live hi-hat, or just like overheads and rooms. I'm using the overheads, rooms, and maybe the hi-hat mic or something, and that feels great. Sometimes I'll tell the drummer like not to play 4 on the floor, even though the beat is 4 on the floor. Sometimes I'll tell them to play, just on the 1 and 3, and because I don't want the phase issues with when the kick and snare are hitting at the same time. And if I'm triggering drums and like using samples, if the kick and snare are hitting slightly off, then the phase of the trigger is not in phase with one or the other. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but
yeah. No, it's really interesting. I love how you said that, like, you'll just take some chunks of real drums and that's it. I think that's really interesting. And it sounds like you're using real drums more for like the real dynamic sections, or where it really matters, right? Because like, like kind of like what you said, when you have like the main verse drum rhythm, it's like that doesn't need to be super dynamic a lot of the times. It just needs to like hold a pocket. And usually consistency is good in that kind of stuff. You don't want a ton of dynamic range in a lot of those backbeats. So, sometimes having some of those samples in there can really just make a solid beat. And then where it matters, you throw in those natural dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think it does depend on genre too. Like for rock music, it's always drums. It's always a live drum. I was referring more to like, pop, R&B, alt, where it's like you don't actually want drums to sound as dynamic and natural as a drummer would play. Like, you want them to sound larger than life. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself like having a drummer play on like an electronic kit versus just recording a live kit, or?
Yeah. I've done that a little bit. I don't have like an incredibly like your kit behind you looks killer. Like to have
it's an old V drum kit that somehow still works a little bit.
Yeah, but like you can get all the correct dynamics and that sort of thing when you're playing. I've done it on cheaper kits before, but I feel I've never really dove into that world. But one thing I have done in the past, and this is with drummers that struggle to break beats up. Like sometimes I'll record the cymbals after the fact. And what I found myself doing is taking the cymbal pads from a V drum kit and using them when they're playing. So he's hitting the pad. There's no actual cymbals happening in the recording, but he still gets the feel and he's hearing the cymbal in his head. And then I'll overdub the cymbals after.
For sure. Well, it's interesting too because, speaking of dynamics, and it may be one of the reasons why you prefer having live drums for things like fills is like when you're using program drums, just the way that they're made on the back end, like there's only so many sample layers that they're firing off depending on certain velocities too. So, a lot of those dynamics can sometimes just get lost just based on the software that you're using, right? Like it's not going to have so many different samples to get that supernatural sound sometimes, and so I think that's something a lot of people aren't even aware of that happens on the back end.
Totally. And if I want drums to sound natural, I'll always record live drums, real drums with a great drummer. And there's no substitute for it. But when I want the opposite, like I even found myself in Addictive Drummer, like there's this button that says no alts, like no alternate hits. And if I'm layering different loops or different samples, I'll always turn that on because I don't want all these different hits because it messes with the phase and the punch of the kits or of the hits and the drums.
Yeah, I found myself like even recently I was just recording a track and using this V-drum kit, and it was kind of amazing to hear like just I was using Contact and I can't remember the library I was using, but even just the cymbal hits like certain velocities, like a 95 on the velocity was like a light tapping sound on the cymbal, and then a 96 the velocity was like a big heavy crash sound, right? So it's like it's so easy to just like lose that natural feel on cymbals sometimes. So yeah, I can see why just re-recording real cymbals afterwards could be a very useful case in that situation.
Yeah, I hate fake cymbals unless they're just crashes or they're like loops already made. But like trying to get a live hi-hat with feel in even in the most current drum sample plugins is that I'm pulling my hair out. Like I dread it. Like it gives me anxiety. So I'll usually get the drummer to do it if he can do it on his computer. I'll be like, hey, can you sequence in some hi-hats that sound real?
Yeah. Well, going back to my question about just like blending in electronic elements with real elements, how do you go about finding complementary sounds when it comes to blending those kind of stuff? Like, what's your process look like for that?
Yeah, that's a great question and something that I've been working on and I've struggled with in the past. I think it's all about finding what's missing within the information or the tracks that you have currently. I used to always think that like, wow, if I'm putting samples in, they have to have lots of low end and they have to have lots of crack and lots of attack, but that's not always the case. So it's always like a case by case basis of finding the information, and I'm referring to drums mostly, but the information that's missing in a track. Like if you have live drums that have like this beautiful mid-range to them, but there's not a lot of low end, then you can put in like just like a really subby kick that doesn't have low end, or sorry, that doesn't have mid-range, and you get that added low end. But say you have a snare that just doesn't have the crack that you want, or there's too much hi-hat bleed, then you'll want a sample with a lot of crack in it to add to that and complement it.
That's a great point. I think a lot of people just tend to look for samples that have the sound that they're looking for, and then at that point you're just replacing things altogether.
Yeah, and I went down that rabbit hole. I've gone down there in the past, thinking, well, this is a great drum sample, so why doesn't it work? And just like fighting with it, and it doesn't matter how good it sounds on its own. If it doesn't sound good in the track, then it shouldn't be there.
Yeah. Of course. As far as drum samples go, do you find yourself using like room samples and stuff like that, or do you tend to just lean on like more dry signals?
Oh, I'll use room samples for sure, especially on the snare. Sometimes in the chorus, if I want a big snare. What I'll usually do when I'm tracking drums is at Studio B, the main studio at Echo Plant, we've got a really big echo chamber that's connected to the live room, and we'll throw mics in there for when we're tracking drums. And I'll get samples after every every time I do a drum session, I'll make sure to get all the samples. So sometimes I'll just create a trigger of, just the rooms or just the echo chamber, and then I'll trigger just that if I just want that. And then I also have my sort of some go-to like room samples where it's just like just a room, or if it's a clap, just a clap that's like a little bit at a time. So the transient of it hits not at the same time as the snare, because I rarely want that. I want it to spread a little bit and have the transient just slightly spread out so that you can hear the clap and then you get the snare.
Yeah. For your samples, are you using something like Slate Trigger for that kind of thing? Or are you like programming everything to MIDI or audio spikes? What's that look like?
I love Slate Trigger. I've been using it for a very, very long time. It's really the only triggering software I use. I have used the addictive one, but not even enough to know what it's called. Yeah. And I've used the Massey, the Trigger Creator plugin?
Yeah, DRT.
Yeah, DRT. My engineer, his name's David Zier. He's an incredible engineer, the fastest engineer I've ever worked with. But after we did a drum session, he was like, "Hey, I'll just make some drum triggers for you," because there was a little too much hi-hat bleed, and it was triggering the snare before the snare would come in because of the hi-hat. Yeah, so he made some triggers for me. But I'll always I've created so many trigger files based on samples I've made or samples I've found or whatever. So I've got this huge database of Slate Trigger samples that I'll go to. And that's why I use Slate Trigger, just because I've got so many samples and I just know them well.
Yep. That makes sense. Yeah, I think especially when you're familiar with the sounds that you've used on projects, why not lean into those again? You know them very well and how they fit in a mix. But that brings up another interesting point too, which is that idea of having tons of samples and kind of information overwhelm to some degree. And I get asked all the time too, how do I know what samples to use? And it's like, well, you kind of have to know your library to some degree, right? How do you go about picking your samples there?
Well, I will admit my library, thanks to Splice, has gotten way bigger than I want it to be, to the point where I'm going to have to start categorizing drum samples into genre so that I'm not looking through a bunch of dance kick drums when I'm looking for something rock. But sorry, what was the question? How do I organize them, or how do I choose?
Well, yeah, organizing them and choosing them. I guess that goes hand in hand, because when you first get Stephen Slate Trigger and you see even the 50 snares that come with it, it's for a lot of people they're like, how do I know which one is a good one or when to use that? And I guess maybe it goes back to what you were saying earlier about just finding the complementary sounds, right?
Yeah, one thing I've done is I've created trigger presets. If I because I can listen to drums and get a sense, right? I know, and I'll listen to the drums that are given to me or the drums that are in front of me, and I'll know what's wrong with them. What is it missing? Is it crack? Is it low end? Is it mid range? Is it roominess? So I'll have trigger presets where every slot is filled with something. They're all muted, so I'll bring that into the session, and then just and it's always in the context of the full drum kit or the full song, just start unmuting things and flipping phase, and then find the drum, that complements it. Because I find a lot of times with anything, kick, snare, toms, that the phase, it's not that it's out of phase or in phase, it's just neither one works with what's there. So it's one of them creates way too much punch, upper bass punch, say for a kick drum, and then the other one cancels all the mid range out, and you just get this long deep sub, and you don't want either of them. So then I know right away that's the wrong sample. Just delete it, and I'll go through and find the ones that are giving me that perceived impact, but not jumping way out of the track.
Yeah. I think that makes the most sense. That's actually how I've always done it too, where I'll just have my presets that I know, for certain sounds of snares, here's eight presets already kind of loaded up, ready to go, and just mute or unmute, whatever, and find the blend of whatever you need to complement it. Yeah, it sure beats like just looking at a giant list of, kick 1 through 100 or whatever and just having to scroll through all of those. So I think, when you have some of your go-tos, it makes it a lot easier to just find what you need much faster.
Yeah, and for kick drums, there definitely are my favorite, my go-tos. There's one, it's called Stupid Kick. I don't even know where I got it, but it's called Stupid Kick, and it's got crazy sub, crazy deep low end, and that one I know it's a little too long, but sometimes if the song's slower, it works perfectly, or sometimes I just have to gate it or like just change the release and the sustain of it to make it a little lower. Knowing your library is really, really helpful, especially in terms of speed of workflow, because then, you can spend a long time looking through a huge sample library of kicks. You'll get there eventually, but especially if you're working with clients, like they don't want to, most of them don't want to hear you sample kick drums for 20 minutes.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. You think about like back in the day, you hear stories of like, was it Metallica that would spend like a couple days just working on a kick drum sound? Like to think about doing that these days is wild,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I used to do, and I love it. It's so much, it's a lot of fun. And I feel like that's how because I had never studied anything like production or engineering or anything, I had to learn the hard way. Yeah, I remember I had no bookings, so I would just spend 2 days miking up a kick drum and being like, what sounds like what? Like how do you get it to sound deeper? How do you get it to sound punchy? How do you tune it to make it sound a certain way? And that's fun. But definitely increases the budget of a project if you're going to spend 2 days on a kick drum sound.
Absolutely. Well, another element that I was curious to ask about that I really admire in your productions is your vocals. And I think you do an amazing job of getting your vocals to sound like really clear, really focused, and really controlled. Like the control was the thing that really stood out to me the most. And so I'm curious to know, like when it comes to getting really controlled, clear vocals, what's your secret for that?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Working with a great singer is obviously the number one way to get that. If you have a singer that can control their sibilance, that can control their dynamics, that has incredible tone, it makes my job exponentially easier. And when I get those, like when I put a new singer in front of a mic and it's like, oh yes, this is going to be fun. It's just so nice because then you're not worrying about all like, how do I get rid of this edginess? How do I get rid of the muddiness? Why is it so sibilant? It's already there, and then you can process it as much as you want. It's like the more you compress it, the like more exciting it gets. It's not the more harsh and sibilant it gets. So that's always, and that's what I strive for. I want to work with strong singers, but there's a lot of genres where the vibe isn't that. Like it's not about having like an incredible voice. Sometimes the scrappiness and the scratchiness of a vocalist is what makes it cool. And sometimes, vocalists aren't as in tune as they should be, but once they're processed, it sounds great. So a few of the things that I lean into, I'm always there when I'm producing. I'm always there for the vocal performance. I know some producers aren't even there for it. I've never understood that. I don't understand how you can call yourself the producer on an album and not be there for vocals. It's like the most important thing. And there's so much that you can do to guide the process. So I'm always there. I definitely like to choose the right mic for the singer. I also like to make sure that it's in the right position for how they're singing or their style of singing. Sometimes it's up above their head, pointed down towards their chest to reduce sibilance. Sometimes it's pointed at their forehead if they're really sibilant, and then I'm not picking up all the mouth stuff. Sometimes it's down below, pointed at their chin. Sometimes they're just eating an SM7. So I definitely like to experiment to find that because it makes my life so much easier whoever's working on the project next. It makes their life so much easier. But in terms of the production side of things, I'll do whatever is necessary to make the vocalist sound like they have great tone, their sibilance is controlled, they they're not muddy, they're clear. A few things, that come to mind that I like to lean into. I like to experiment with layering vocals. I do a lot of vocal layering, especially for singers that just might not be as strong. If a vocal feels like it can't stand on its own, when I'm just listening to it, then I'll always try doubling vocals. And some vocalists just sound so good doubled, and others don't. It just depends on their tone. But if they don't sound good, if they do sound good doubled, then it's easy. It's like, okay, we're going to do one double in the verse and then one double on either side for the chorus. And sometimes they're so subtle you can't even hear them, but it just gives that width, it gives that depth. And how you process them too is really important. You don't just duplicate the lead vocal processing over and pan them always. It's a lot of times it's like they're filtered. They have like full reverb on them, or they're distorted. They're usually highly de-essed, so they're not getting in the way. So yeah, layering is a big thing for me. I'll also go through, either myself or my editor will go through and adjust the sibilance with Melodyne. If a vocalist is extra sibilant, I don't like over de-essed voices, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too, as every mixer is. But I don't like it, so I'll try and automate them down, and I find Melodyne works really well. And if it still needs more, then I'll just volume trim the S's down on the lead vocal. Usually all of my background vocals are just really heavily de-essed because you can't hear them well enough to be able to tell. But you really need that balance of the S's coming through and being heard, but not being too sibilant. Harshness is a big one, man. Yeah. Soothe has been a lifesaver for me, as I'm sure most producers will say. Like, it just saved me so much time. I still use Pro Q3 a lot on the dynamic setting, cutting those 2.5, 3, 4K, sometimes 8, those ranges on a vocal. And that definitely helps a lot, just because my vocals are compressed enough that if you just compress the raw vocal, a lot of times you'll get all of that bad stuff, sibilance and mid-range and muddiness kind of come up, and it's too much. Reverb is a big thing. A lot of times reverb can just take up way too much space in a mix on a vocal, especially if it's like, I don't know, dream pop or shoegaze or pop where the vocal has a lot of reverb, or like kind of alt country stuff where there's like a big plate on it. The vocal reverb has to be right. There can't be too much mid-range, can't be too much low end, can't be too much top end. And that's all about what else is happening in the track. So a lot of times I'll EQ or de-ess the send to the reverb if it's a brighter reverb, or I'll EQ the reverb after pretty heavily. Sometimes I'll compress the crap out of it just to get all the sustain out of it. Sometimes I'll key the vocal to a compressor after the reverb, so it's just the tail that comes up, and it keeps the vocal, when the vocalist is singing, it keeps the reverb tucked in, and then it kind of comes up afterwards. It's like ducking, essentially.
That's very cool. Yeah, man, dude, that was like a very thorough answer, and I love that. Like, but it makes it like all of that makes complete sense to me, especially as it relates to like the layering and making. You kind of need contrast between your background vocals and your double or in your lead vocal, and I think you're right. A lot of people would just slap on the same preset that they use on the lead vocal and be like, oh, that worked for that vocal, so why not do it times 3 or whatever. But yeah, when you do take care of some of those other elements like sibilance and all that other stuff, or even I find sometimes tuning the background vocals a little harder can sometimes just make them act like more of a pad than a vocal. They don't have as much of that like the vibrato or whatever in their voice, and sometimes that really helps just to add more support and leave one element as like the main dynamic thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. As far as like getting control with dynamics with vocals, you talked about how you'll often do a lot of that other processing, de-essing, and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to compression, what kind of compression are you typically doing with vocals? Are you the kind of person who likes to hit vocals harder with compression, or what's your thought on that?
Yes, I do. I have I've been guilty of overcompressing a vocal.
That's not a bad thing. If it sounds good, it is good, right?
Oh no, I mean, but I mean early on, like, sometimes. Anyways, that's not important. Your question on the way in, I this is my go-to. It's not always the same, but I found this works for like pop and rock R&B vocals. I'm usually choosing the right mic. A lot of times that's the Manley reference cardioid, which I love. To me, it sounds like a modern 67. I could be way off on that, but just that's how I hear it. Typically I'm hitting purple MC77 first after the preamp, which is typically a Neve. That's taking just the transients. So just the loud transients or the loud section, super loud, bringing that down about 6 dB at the most. Sometimes it's only 3. After that, I'm into an LA2A or a distressor set to the opto setting, and I'll set that so that it's compressing more of an RMS style compressing, just like most of the time, but like 3 dB. So that way not one compressor is taking up too much of the information. Like when vocalist sings louder, the MC77 kicks in and takes it down before it goes into the distressor or the LA2A. So that gives me a vocal that's controlled enough that I feel good. You can listen to it in the track without having to put too much processing on it. And that gets me into Pro Tools. And then after that, who knows? there's no method that I always use. I started using the UAD top line plugin, which has been interesting. It's a good way to get a vocal like sounding more finished right away, because a lot of vocalists, like, they want to hear how it sounds finished, and for me that takes a bit of time getting a vocal, with the right de-essing and reverb and compression and that sort of thing. So I'll use that sometimes as just a quick way of doing it. I'm always compressing again, unless I've overcompressed it, but I never do that anymore. I love using the Waves Aphex Exciter, the vintage, what is it? Vintage? Aphex,
Oral Exciter?
Oral Exciter. Yeah, that plugin on the send setting, I think the number 2 setting, because that's really a nice way to kind of soften up a vocal. And then I'll take typically like an air EQ, like the Mag or the Slate Air, and then I'll boost the very, very top end of it. So then I don't have all that harsh mid-range, but I get the nice air to it. So that's what I'll do if a vocal sounds too mid-rangey and a little bit too harsh. After, if Soothe and Fab Filter don't do the trick, I'll kind of do that. But yeah, that's kind of where I start. So sometimes all of my inserts are full on a vocal. Sometimes it's like 2.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I like that a lot. I think that when people are getting started, they tend to shy away from, there's always like that learning curve of, like, when you get started, you tend to shy away from using a lot of compression, maybe because it's harder to hear, so you don't know what you're doing with it. So a lot of people will leave their vocals very unprocessed. And then once you discover compression, people tend to go very heavy-handed with it and sometimes just kill a vocal. And then finally you learn how to like navigate, like, okay, well, maybe I'll go a little bit lighter on the tracking stage, kind of like you described there, and then you can hit it a little bit more in the mix stage, right?
Yes, for sure. I was definitely guilty of that. Yeah, just some light compression on the way in, get it a little bit controlled, then you can go to town. And I also sometimes I'll use multiple parallel vocal processing chains. Sometimes I'll have one with like a rat distortion on it to give it like mid-range crunch, and then I'll have a devil lock on another one. And sometimes I'll have like a nectar, just like with like a weird reverb on it or something, to kind of automate that up a little bit. And I'll send that off the lead vocal, and that can help me, especially with the devil lock, or there's this one called the JST gain reduction plugin that is just an insane amount of compression. I'd like when the meter's moving like 2 dB, it sounds like it's like 20.
I'm very familiar with that one. It works great for like heavy stuff, for sure.
Yeah. But when you really need a vocal to cut through, but as opposed to just using the mix knob, which I do sometimes I'll just put it on an auxiliary track and then just tuck it in underneath just to give that vocal some weight and help it cut through a little bit more into a mix.
At what point in your mixing process do you work on vocals? Because I know some people will start with vocals, some people will do it after they've done all the instrumentation. So what's that look like for you?
Yeah, it depends on the song. And if I'm just mixing a song, like if someone's giving me tracks to mix, and say it's a slower song, say it's piano, guitar, vocals or something, then a lot of times I'll start with the piano and vocals, and I'll get that feeling really good. It's really deciding what's driving the song. You know, is it the drums? You know, is it the bass? And obviously the vocal is always driving the song, but sometimes, you know, it's sort of complementing the instrumentation that's there. If it's heavier drum forward track, I usually start working on vocals 20% into my mix, get them to the point where, because if they're totally dry and uncompressed, then I can't even really turn them up to how loud I want them to be turned up. So usually put some sort of processing on them early on, just to get them up to the level. You know, notice what the issues are with that particular vocal, if there's edginess, if there's muddiness, sibilance or whatever. But I don't like to leave vocals until the very end, because then you're just kind of whatever space is left over, you're finding space for the vocal. You know, in most of the music that I work on, the vocal is the most important thing. So I like to try to, get the vocal sounding the way that I want it to, and then finding usually drums and then vocals, and then I kind of work everything else into it from there. Drums, bass, and vocals. And then once that's dialed, yeah, it's the rest is easy. It's just fun.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've always kind of taken the same approach too, of focus on drums, bass, get the rhythm section locked down, and then throw in the vocal, because that's providing the melody that people are paying attention to. It's you need those two things to be very in the forefront of the mix. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but one last question for you as it relates to the production and mixing side of it. In your mind, at the end of the day, what ultimately makes a great mix?
Other than giving me goosebumps? Yes, because that is the true test. You know, if I listen to it and it gives me this sort of I'm relaxed in the sense of knowing that it feels really good to me. Yeah, well, it's definitely, I know that's a dumb answer, but the goosebumps thing is huge for me. It just has to give me this sense of I take a deep breath and it's I listen to it and it's oh, nothing about this gives me anxiety. Nothing is that's not right. That's not right. And I know that's super, super vague, but usually if it passes the test of sounding good on my NS10s, sounding good on AirPods Pro or what I use, and then if I can still hear everything on my phone and it gives me goosebumps, then that is ready to be sent off to the artist. That's your the holy grail of testing. I love that. Yeah, that really is. Oh, and my Sonos. I use a Sonos SL1 or SL100. I don't know, the smaller one. I have that routed into my monitor controller. So, because so many people listen on those smaller Sonos and Beats, Pills, and that sort of thing. So I have that set up in here that I'm always referencing as well, just to see what the average Bluetooth speaker is gonna translate it to. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, might as well just check it on kind of the average consumer speaker. Yeah. Right on, man. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and you shared a lot of great stuff here today. If people want to learn more about you, maybe follow you online or even work with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Yeah, Instagram is a great way, ryan.worsley.music, and then at Echo Plant Sound is the studio. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way. EchoPlantSound.com is the website if anyone's interested in kind of getting some more info about the studio. We love to work with all forms of artists, and there's a 2-bedroom suite up above the studio, like I might have mentioned. So we're happy to kind of host artists if they're coming from out of town.
Awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I loved the questions. And
thanks, man.
Yeah.
Right on. So that was my chat with Ryan Worsley, and I really appreciate the depth that he went into as far as how he goes about creating that excitement in his tracks. And I love that he talked about doing little automation moves like filtering low end or top end, and also just even the idea that when it comes to having tracks grow, it's not always just about dynamics. Yes, dynamics are a part of that. And when we think of choruses, we often do think about the choruses feeling bigger and having more of a lift in them. But it's not always just because of volume, right? It's all those other things that he talked about here: frequency content, instrumentation. And, when you can play with automation to help you get that, and even some of the stereo width tools that he talked about there too, like it can just really make your mixes pop and have so much more energy. And that's what this is all about, right? We don't want mixes that feel very static and boring. We want tracks that grow and that catch your attention. People have short attention spans these days, so we need to capture their attention by making these little adjustments throughout a track that just pull your ears into it and keep you excited as you listen to a song. So yeah, I thought it was really cool to hear more about that process for Ryan. And also, it was really interesting to hear about how he goes about approaching vocals. And I love the details that he went into there as well, talking about how he goes about handling things like de-essing. Such a simple thing, but we often don't think about how all of those little elements come together. And I love that he talked about how he'll go more extreme with his background vocals and just the ways that he gets his lead vocal to pop out against everything else in the mix. Even hearing his thoughts on when to double track versus when to keep something singular, I think that's also really important too. So again, if you're someone who is listening to this, who is struggling to get your vocals to have that pro polish, these are the little details that go into it. And Ryan basically just gave us a whole recipe there to help you get those polished vocals. So definitely make sure to go back in this interview, jot down some notes as to all of those different things he mentioned, and start implementing them into your own tracks. Because I can guarantee you that if you do, you're going to end up with much better results. And if you're still struggling to get your track to sound polished and you want some extra help throughout that journey, maybe you're not sure what tools to be using or ultimately how to dial in the best settings for your particular songs, that's exactly what I'd love to help you out with. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that's what I do. I work with my students to help you figure out what is it that you ultimately want your tracks to sound like? What is your bar for what sounds good? And then based on that, we come up with a clear game plan that is a repeatable process for you from beginning to end, from everything to do with recording, editing, and mixing your tracks to make sure that you're getting the results that you want and that you know exactly what to do. You feel confident along the way. And as you're implementing it, you're getting feedback to make sure that you're on the right track. If something is off or if you need to make some extra tweaks, my job here in this program is to help you get that clarity and to help direct you to ultimately end up with the sound that you want. So if you're looking for one-on-one help and you want to gain that beginning to end system that gives you the ability to create pro sounding tracks with confidence, with speed, then make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And on that page there's a button where you can apply for the program and book a call with me. And I'd love to hop on a call to learn more about you and your music and your processes, what you're feeling stuck with, and ultimately where to focus your energy. And if it seems like I can help you as part of that process, then I'd love to invite you into the program. I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. My reputation relies on helping people see success. And so because of that reason, I only take on people who I truly believe I can help. So once again, if you're interested in getting that one-on-one help, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And I'd love to help you get your songs done so they can finally be released and you can finally feel proud of them. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. So thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.